The heat lay heavy over the plains, the kind that bent light into wavering ghosts above the earth and made the skin feel tight and dry. Wind carried the bitter scent of sagebrush and dust, swirling it along the path that wound from the far ridge toward the weathered ranch house. The boards of the porch were silvered with sun and time, the windows clouded with grit. From inside came a thin, desperate cry, the sort of sound that caught in the chest and did not let go. It broke the rhythm of the wind, small but sharp, like a thread pulled taut until it frayed. She paused at the gate, one hand on the warm, splintered wood. The baby's wail rose again, quicker now, as if the short breaths between had run out. She knew the sound, knew its urgency in a way that bypassed thought, and her steps carried her forward without command. Leather straps of the water pouch dug into her shoulder, the weight of it shifting with each stride. Her boots left shallow prints in the dust that the wind tried to erase before they could settle. The ranch smelled faintly of wood smoke, though the fire in the hearth had long since burned down to embers. Inside the air was still and close. The cradle, pushed near the wall to avoid the draft from the door, held a small bundle whose fists opened and closed in restless hunger. The baby's eyes squeezed shut, cheeks drawn tight over delicate bones. She did not speak, words felt clumsy in the space. Instead, she reached down, cradling the child with a touch that was instinct before anything else. The baby's small body was warm against her, the cry softening but not stopping. Behind her, soft footfalls creaked across the floorboards. The other two women stepped inside without hesitation, their presence natural, as if they belonged to the room already. One moved toward the hearth, crouching low to stir the embers until a faint flame bloomed. The other crossed to the cupboard, retrieving a tin cup and filling it from the water she carried. They worked without exchanging glances, each knowing the rhythm of the other's movements. She sat with the child against her shoulder, rocking gently. The warmth of the baby's breath on her collarbone tightened something in her chest she had long trained to stay still. She heard the scrape of the cradle's legs as one of the women pulled it closer to the hearth, the small fire pushing away the afternoon chill that always settled when the wind shifted. The sound of the wind outside became a backdrop rather than a force pressing in. The baby's cries weakened, replaced by small, erratic hiccups. She let her eyes travel over the room, the sagging shelves, the untended corner where a stack of laundry had gone unwashed, the rifle leaning against the wall. She recognized in these things the shape of a household run by a man alone. She also recognized the absence in the air, the hollowness that loss leaves behind. Her fingers smoothed the baby's blanket, tracing the worn threads as if they could speak back to her. Hoofbeats approached from the east, steady at first, then slowing. A shadow passed over the window before the door swung open, letting in a sudden wash of bright light. He stood there, tall, shoulders squared from years of work, hat shadowing his eyes. Dust clung to the edges of his coat, his boots marked with the day's labor. His gaze moved first to the baby, then to her. He did not ask who she was. His voice, when it came, was even but edged with caution. "You found her crying?" It was more a statement than a question. She nodded once, the motion small. "Hungry," she said, the word carrying weight far beyond its size. He stepped inside, closing the door with a care that kept it from rattling in the frame. The wind outside rose briefly before the latch caught. He crossed the room, each step measured, and took the baby from her arms. The exchange was smooth, almost formal, and for a moment their eyes met. His were tired but alert, scanning hers for some unspoken answer. She held his gaze without challenge, only a quiet steadiness, as if to say she had no intention of causing harm. The other two women stood apart now, watching with stillness that came from knowing when to speak and when not to. He looked at them briefly, a flicker of calculation passing across his face, but his attention returned to the child. "I was mending the south fence," he said. "Didn't hear her at first." She did not reply. Instead, she let her gaze drift toward the window, where the light was beginning to change, golden, slanted, making the dust motes turn slow circles in the air. From that vantage, she caught sight of a rider passing along the distant trail, slowing just enough to look toward the ranch. The tilt of his head was unmistakable, curiosity laced with judgment. He didn't linger, but the message was clear enough. In this land, word traveled faster than riders. The man, rancher, widower, she guessed, shifted the baby in his arms, the small face pressing into his shirt. "You live near?" he asked. She shook her head. "Farther than most care to ride." His brow lifted slightly, but he didn't push. The silence between them was not empty. It held the weight of questions neither seemed ready to ask. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling into the fabric at his chest. He looked down at her, his voice softening. "She'll sleep soon." One of the women by the hearth moved to pour the water into a small pot, setting it near the fire's edge to warm. The scent of heat on metal joined the room's mixture of wood smoke and dust. The action was domestic, almost gentle, but it threaded into the moment like a promise that this child would not be left to cry again. Outside, the wind's pitch dropped, the horizon settling into the muted colors that came before evening. She watched the man hold the baby, noticed the way his thumb traced absent circles on her back without him seeming aware. The tenderness there, small and unguarded, unsettled her more than any show of strength could have. She had known men who carried their grief like a shield, edges out, but he seemed to carry his inward as if protecting it from exposure. She recognized that shape of sorrow. It matched her own. The other two women, finished with their quiet work, glanced toward her. A single nod passed between them, silent agreement that their part here was not yet done. She rose from her seat, brushing dust from her skirt. "We'll see to her again," she said, her voice low, certain. It was not a question. He studied her for a long moment, weighing something unseen. Finally he gave a short, deliberate nod. "If you choose to," he said. They stepped outside into the cooling air, the wind now carrying the scent of distant rain that would likely never reach the plains. The sky in the west burned with streaks of orange and crimson, fading toward indigo at the horizon. She glanced back once at the house, seeing the silhouette of the man at the window, the baby in his arms. It was a still image, but it carried movement within it, a beginning, perhaps, or the shape of one. The ride back toward the ridge was quiet. The leather of the saddle creaked softly beneath her, and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves felt like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Yet in her mind, the baby's earlier cry lingered, transformed now into something else, less urgent but no less insistent. It was a reminder of the choice she had made simply by stepping through that door, and of the choices yet to come. She did not know if the man would welcome them again, or if the whispers from town would find their way to his ear before trust could root itself. She did know, however, that the child had looked at her once with wide, searching eyes, and in that gaze she had seen a reflection of her own hunger, not for milk, but for the safety that came when another hand did not let go. That was reason enough to return. The horizon swallowed the sun, leaving behind the afterglow that blurred the line between earth and sky. She urged her horse into a steady pace, each stride carrying her deeper into the shadowed land. The ranch lay behind her, but its presence stayed near, woven into the rhythm of her breath and the memory of warm weight against her shoulder. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of sage and the faintest trace of smoke, as if the day were leaving a trail she could follow back. The morning broke pale and windless, the sky the color of worn linen. From her place near the corral, she could see the man moving along the fence line with measured precision, his back bent slightly as he worked the hammer. Each strike rang out across the open space, sharp against the hush. The sound seemed to anchor the ranch, as if without it the place might drift away into the horizon. She watched from a distance, the baby's soft breathing a steady weight against her arm. The other two women moved through the yard in easy rhythm, one scattering grain for the chickens, the other hauling water to the trough where the horses waited with patient eyes. Days had begun to arrange themselves into an unspoken order. She rose early, often before the man, tending to small tasks without invitation, sweeping grit from the doorway, folding the baby's blankets, mending the sleeve of his work shirt where it had frayed. He did not stop her, nor did he comment, but she noticed the way his gaze lingered a moment longer each time he passed her. His silence was not dismissive, it was the kind of silence that held acknowledgement, even if it never shaped itself into words. The baby, once gaunt and restless, now lay in the cradle with cheeks rounded and skin warmed with color. She kicked her feet in small bursts, the sound of her contentment a counterpoint to the hammer's steady rhythm outside. Feeding her had become a task shared without instruction. One of them always seemed to be near when she stirred. The man, for his part, often hovered at the doorway during these moments, as if ensuring nothing was amiss without intruding on the act itself. It was on the third trip to town that the undercurrent of trouble began to show itself more clearly. The man had hitched the wagon, the boards creaking as he tested their strength. She climbed up beside him without asking, her skirt settling against the worn wood. The baby was left in the care of the two women, both of whom gave her a look that carried neither approval nor disapproval, only a steady reminder to return. The road into town wound past low hills and through a dry creek bed where stones glinted under the sun. They spoke little on the way, though she could feel the questions coiling beneath his restraint. He glanced at her once, the brim of his hat shadowing his expression. "You've been a help," he said simply, as if the words had taken several days to choose. She met his gaze briefly, unsure if acknowledgement or deflection was expected. "The child needs more than one pair of hands," she replied, the sentence as much about him as it was about the baby. In town, the shift in air was immediate. The street was lined with storefronts whose windows reflected the bright glare of the sky, but beneath the glass lay the watchful eyes of those inside. At the general store, the door's bell gave a brittle jangle as they stepped in. The clerk's smile faltered when he saw her, though it recovered enough to pass for courtesy. Two women by the counter stopped their conversation mid-sentence, turning just enough to make their scrutiny plain. The man ignored them, moving directly to the shelves to gather flour, coffee, and salt. She followed in silence, aware of the whispers rising in the wake of their passage. At the counter, as the clerk measured out sugar, a man near the back muttered something low but clear enough to catch. "Strange company for a widower." The words hung in the air like the metallic scent before lightning. The man beside her did not turn, but she saw his jaw tighten, the muscle working once before settling. When the goods were paid for, they left without haste, the door closing behind them with a thud that seemed to end the room's stillness. On the ride back, neither spoke of it. The horse's steady gait filled the silence, and the wheel's creak became a kind of shield against anything more. She glanced at him once, finding his face set in a way that was not anger but something deeper, determination edged with weariness. It was not the first time he had been judged, she thought, and it would not be the last. By evening, the wind had risen, carrying a cooler edge. As the baby slept, the man approached her where she sat near the porch steps, a small leather pouch in his hand. "Seeds," he said, placing it in her palm. The weight was slight, but it carried meaning beyond its size. "Choose where to plant them." She opened the pouch, the faint scent of earth rising from within. Her eyes moved to the gate, where the view stretched toward the open land. "There," she said, nodding to the spot by the entrance. "So anyone coming here will see what grows." His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but the corner of his mouth lifted for a moment before smoothing again. "Then there it will be," he said, and turned back to the yard. She held the pouch a moment longer before tucking it into her pocket. The days after carried a subtle change. He began leaving tools where she could reach them, not as a request but as an unspoken allowance for her to use them if she wished. She found herself helping mend a section of fence, her hands learning the rhythm of pulling wire tight and driving staples into wood. He offered brief instructions, each one pared down to necessity, and when she met his eyes after finishing a task, he gave a short nod of approval. It was a language made of few words but understood all the same. It was during one of these afternoons, the sun high and the air dry enough to chap the lips, that a rider came in fast from the north. His horse threw up dust in a sharp plume and he reined in hard near the porch. The man stepped forward, his body between her and the stranger without thought. "Rustlers sighted," the rider said, his voice clipped. "Drove off cattle from the Barlow place. Could be heading this way." The rider left as quickly as he came, the sound of hooves fading toward the ridge. The man turned to her, eyes narrowed. "We'll need to keep watch tonight." His tone carried no question. She met it with the same certainty. "Then I'll keep watch with you." For a moment he seemed poised to refuse, but something in her gaze, steady, unyielding, held him still. He gave a single nod. "All right. But stay where you can see the corral. If they come, it'll be for the horses or the cattle first." That night, the ranch seemed to shrink into itself. The baby slept inside, tended by the two women, while she and the man moved in quiet arcs around the property. The moon had not yet risen and the darkness pressed close. The air carried the faint scent of the animals, their restlessness marked by shifting hooves and low snorts. She kept to the shadows, the rifle balanced in her hands. From somewhere beyond the fence, a coyote's call lifted and faded, but no human voices followed. The hours stretched, the rhythm of watchfulness settling into her bones. The man passed her once, his arm brushing hers in the narrow space between the corral and the shed. He did not look at her, but the brief contact held more than simple proximity. It was a reminder that they stood together in whatever might come. By the time the horizon began to pale with the first edge of dawn, no sign of the rustlers had appeared. Yet the absence did not lessen the tension. It simply left it coiled, waiting. She stood at the gate, the seed pouch still in her pocket, and looked out over the land. Somewhere out there, trouble moved in its own time. She knew it would come. The man joined her, his eyes scanning the distance as hers did. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "They'll test us sooner or later." She kept her gaze forward. "Then we'll be ready." The light crept over the plains, catching the tops of the sage and turning them silver. For a moment, The ranch looked less like an isolated holdout and more like a place that could be defended, sustained. She felt the baby's earlier warmth still in her arms, though she held nothing now, and realized that the choice to remain was no longer something she was weighing, it was something she had already made. Behind them, the house stood with its worn boards and clouded windows, but it no longer seemed to sag under its own neglect. The sound of the wind through the grass was steady, like breath in sleep. They stayed at the gate a moment longer, neither speaking, the weight of the coming days between them. Then, without signal, they turned back toward the house, the unspoken understanding carrying them both inside. The day carried a stillness that felt unnatural. The wind had dropped away, leaving the air heavy as if the land itself were waiting for something. From the porch, she could see the horizon clearly, each rise and hollow of the plains etched sharp under the late sun. The man moved with deliberate calm as he checked the gate latch, his hand lingering on the wood for a moment longer than needed. She knew that gesture, not hesitation but the gathering of thought before action. The baby's faint murmur drifted from inside, a small sound wrapped in the softer rustle of the other two women tending her. Somewhere far off, a crow called once, its voice dry and cutting through the heat. The rustlers had not been seen since the warning days ago, but the absence had only deepened the tension. She felt it in the way the man's eyes tracked the horizon more often, in the quieting of the yard at dusk, in the subtle way the two women stayed closer to the house after dark. The ground underfoot seemed to hold its breath. She had felt such waiting before in other places where trouble circled like a wolf, never rushing its prey. As the sun began its slow descent, she walked the length of the corral, her fingers trailing along the rough top rail. The horses shifted uneasily, ears flicking toward the open land. The smell of their sweat mixed with dust, sharp and familiar. When she returned to the porch, the man was there, leaning against the post with a rifle resting in the crook of his arm. His eyes met hers for a moment before sliding away, scanning the horizon again. "It'll be tonight," he said, his voice low but certain. She did not ask how he knew. Some knowledge came not from signs you could name, but from the way the air changed and the silence pressed down. They ate early, a sparse meal finished before the light had fully gone. Inside, the baby fed and then drifted into sleep, her small breaths rising and falling against the quiet hum of the women's voices. The man stepped outside first and she followed, the rifle's weight settling naturally into her hands. They took up positions they had not discussed but somehow both understood. He near the gate, where anyone would have to pass, and she along the shadowed line of the barn, where she could see the corral and the approach from the east. The first sound came like a whisper against the earth, hoofbeats muffled, not the casual pace of a traveler but the measured rhythm of riders who wished to go unnoticed. She felt it before she heard it, the faint vibration under her boots, the tightening in her chest. The man raised his head slightly, his body still otherwise, and she knew he had caught it too. The darkness beyond the fence line shifted, shapes resolving into the silhouettes of mounted men. There were 4 of them, their outlines jagged against the faint light left in the sky. They came closer, reining in just beyond the gate. One leaned forward in his saddle, his voice carrying easily in the night air. "Evenin'. Heard you've got more than cattle here these days." The tone was mockery wrapped in false courtesy. She saw the man's stance change, his weight settling evenly, the rifle now fully in his grip. "You've heard wrong," he said, his voice flat. A low chuckle from another rider. "We'll take a look for ourselves then. Won't be long." The horses shifted, restless, the smell of their sweat drifting across the distance. She stepped forward from the barn's shadow before the man could answer, the rifle steady in her hands. The rider's attention swung toward her, the faint glint of eyes catching in the dark. "You'll take nothing from here," she said, her voice carrying without strain. The words were simple, but each one landed with the weight of certainty. One of the men laughed, short and sharp. "That so? You think you'll stop us?" The night air thickened, the space between them narrowing without anyone moving. She took another step forward, the barrel of her rifle aimed not at a man but at the ground in front of them. Her finger tightened, and the crack of the shot split the air, the sound ricocheting off the stillness. Dirt kicked up in a sharp spray at the hooves of the lead horse, which shied back with a snort. The reaction was immediate. 2 of the riders pulled their mounts sideways, instinct overtaking bravado. The one who had spoken last spat into the dust, his glare lingering on her before he jerked his reins. "Not worth it tonight," he muttered, more to his companions than to her. They wheeled their horses, the rhythm of hoofbeats receding into the open land until the sound faded entirely. For a moment, the only noise was the settling of the corral rails and the slow, even breath she forced into her lungs. The man lowered his rifle slightly, his eyes on her now instead of the dark. He gave a single nod, no praise, no surprise, just the acknowledgement of what had been done. She returned it, the briefest of exchanges carrying the weight of shared ground. They walked the perimeter together before going back inside, the night air cooling against their skin. Inside, the baby slept on, her small face turned toward the faint light of the hearth. The two women glanced at them, reading the outcome in the lack of haste in their steps. One rose to place another log on the fire, the flames catching slowly, sending out the scent of pine. Later, when the ranch was quiet again, she stepped outside alone. The stars had come out, sharp and unblinking in the dark sky, and the air smelled faintly of gunpowder and trampled earth. She went to the gate, kneeling where the bullet had struck, and pressed her hand into the disturbed soil. From her pocket, she drew the leather pouch of seeds. The ground was still warm from the day's sun, the loosened earth giving easily under her fingers. She planted the seeds there, just inside the gate, covering them with a slow, deliberate motion. It was not the season for planting, but she knew that was not the point. Some things you set in the ground simply to mark that you had stood your ground. When she straightened, the man was at the porch, watching. He did not speak, and she did not need him to. The distance between them felt changed, still carrying the quiet but no longer edged with uncertainty. She crossed back toward the house, the cool night air curling around her. As she passed him, his hand brushed hers, not in accident but in a gesture as small and certain as the nod he had given earlier. It was not a promise spoken aloud, but it was the kind that could be kept. Inside, the warmth of the hearth met them both, the scent of smoke and pine wrapping around the low, steady breath of the sleeping child. She stood at the cradle for a long moment, watching the slow rise and fall of the blanket. The other two women had gone to their beds, their presence a quiet boundary of safety in the room. The man moved to the window, looking out into the darkness they had held back for another night. When she finally lay down, it was with the knowledge that the ranch would face more nights like this one, and that she would stand in them as she had tonight. The land outside still held its dangers, the horizon still carried the shapes of men who would take what they could, but the space within these worn walls was no longer unclaimed. The seeds at the gate would take time, maybe more than one season, to push through the soil, but they would grow in the place where they had chosen to stay. And when they did, anyone approaching would see them first.